You think you know the Appalachians. Banjos, coal towns, soft green hills rolling east of the Mississippi. A pretty backdrop in somebody else's story. But these hills are hiding something. Beneath a luxury resort in West Virginia, the government built a fully stocked underground bunker meant to hold the entire United States Congress through a nuclear war, and kept it secret for 30 years. There's a national park here that millions visit every year, where some people walk in and are never seen again. And then, deep in the rock, runs a river so old, it was already flowing before these mountains had finished rising. So it doesn't go around them, it cuts straight through. Almost nobody talks about any of it. So here are 35 facts about the Appalachians that have been hiding from you. 35. The bunker built to hold the United States Congress. When you think of America's Cold War nuclear preparations, you picture concrete silos in the desert or military bases nobody can find, not luxury hotels. But in the mountains of White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, sits the Greenbrier, a grand, sprawling resort that has hosted presidents since the 1700s. And for 30 years, it was hiding the most audacious secret of the Cold War. Beneath the resort's west wing, behind blast doors weighing up to 28 tons each, the federal government built a fully stocked underground bunker designed to house the entire United States Congress through a nuclear war. It was codenamed Project Greek Island and was built between 1959 and 1962. Inside, 18 dormitories, chambers for the House and the Senate, a hospital, and 60 days of supplies. 112,000 square feet of fallout shelter, the size of 2 football fields, dug right into the hillside. A team posing as TV repairmen kept it ready the whole time. Wealthy guests holidayed in the rooms directly above and never knew. It stayed secret until Washington Post reporter Ted Gupp exposed it on May 31st, 1992, and the most classified room in Appalachia became a place you can now tour. 34. The town that saw something coming. When you picture a creature out of American folklore, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, you imagine something rural, distant, never properly documented. Point Pleasant, West Virginia is the exception. It started on November 15, 1966, near an abandoned World War II munitions site locals called the TNT area. Dozens of ordinary people reported the same thing, a winged creature, nearly 7 feet tall, with glowing red eyes, fast enough to chase a car going 100 miles an hour. A local reporter named Mary Heyer logged the sightings for 13 straight months. Then, on December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio collapsed during rush hour, killing 46 people. 9 bodies were never recovered. The sightings stopped that day. Investigators blamed a single eyebar, cracked just 1/10 of an inch, invisible for 40 years. A clean engineering answer. The people who lived through that winter have never been fully convinced it's the whole story. 33. The forest that blinks in unison. Fireflies are supposed to be random. You watch them as a kid, scattered sparks blinking on their own schedule. No pattern to any of it. Except near Elkmont, Tennessee, in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, they break that rule entirely. For about 2 weeks every late May and early June, thousands of a species called Photinus carolinus flash in perfect synchrony, 5 to 8 pulses. Then the whole hillside goes dark at once, then ignites again, like the forest has a heartbeat. It's one of only a handful of places on Earth where this happens. And the leading theory is that the males sync, so no single one stands out to a female. Demand is so high, the Park Service runs an annual lottery just for the 960 vehicle passes. Biologists still argue about exactly why they do it. 32. The largest uprising since the Civil War. When you picture armed Americans fighting on home soil, you picture the 1860s, but the largest labor uprising in US history happened from August 25th to September 2nd, 1921, in Logan County, West Virginia, and most Americans have never heard of it. Around 10,000 coal miners, crushed by company rule and policed by Baldwin Felts detectives, tied red bandanas around their necks and marched on Blair Mtn. Waiting on the ridge was a defending force assembled by anti-Union Sheriff Don Chafin. For 5 days, the two sides fought. Roughly 1 million rounds were fired. Privately hired planes dropped homemade gas and explosive bombs on the miners, and President Warren Harding finally sent in the US Army, which broke the march. At least 16 people died. Nearly 1,000 miners were arrested. For decades, almost no one taught it. Some even trace the word redneck to those red bandanas. 31. The deepest cut east of the Mississippi. Everyone knows the Grand Canyon. Almost nobody realizes there's a gorge on the Kentucky-Virginia line deep enough to earn the comparison. It's called the Breaks, a 5-mile canyon carved by the Russell Fork River, dropping as much as 1,650 feet straight down through Pennsylvanian sandstone. That makes it the deepest gorge east of the Mississippi River, and it's protected by the only interstate park in the southeastern United States, run jointly by both states. They've called it the Grand Canyon of the South for generations. And for once, the nickname isn't just brochure talk. Every October, dam releases turn the Russell Fork into Class 5 whitewater. But the canyon sees a fraction of the crowds the Smokies do. Most people live or drive within an hour of a place like this and never know the ground opens up that far. 30. The tree that built the mountains and then vanished. If you'd walked an Appalachian forest before 1900, 1 in every 4 trees you passed would have been the same species, the American chestnut. They were giants, up to 100 feet tall, trunks wider than a doorway, and they fed everything. Bears, deer, turkeys, and entire mountain communities lived on the nuts that rained down each fall. Families paid their taxes with them. Then, in 1904, a forester named Herman Merkel noticed trees dying at the Bronx Zoo in New York. The culprit was an Asian fungus, and it spread south through the mountains at 50 miles a year. In roughly 40 years, it killed an estimated 3 to 4 billion trees, the largest hardwood in the eastern forest, erased within a single lifetime. The species isn't extinct. The roots still send up doomed shoots that die before they can seed. Scientists are now breeding blight-resistant hybrids to bring back a tree almost nobody alive has seen standing. 29. The ancient scars where the sky fell. Tennessee looks gentle and settled, rolling farmland and quiet ridges. But hidden in the rock are scars left by a kind of violence the surface has long since forgotten. Near the town of Cumberland City in Stewart County sits the Wells Creek structure, a roughly 7.5-mile wide ring of shattered, deformed rock with a strange peak thrust up in its center. For decades, geologists were baffled by it. In 1960, the answer arrived. They found shatter cones, the diagnostic fingerprint of a hypervelocity impact. Wells Creek is an astrobleme, the eroded scar of a meteorite roughly 200 million years old, holding some of the finest shatter cones in the world. A second one, the Flynn Creek structure in Jackson County, was blasted out around 360 million years ago. To be precise, these 2 counties sit on the Highland Rim just west of the main Appalachian provinces. But the bedrock wounds extend into the wider Appalachian region. The craters themselves wore away. Deep in the rock, the violence is permanent. 28. The mountain sliced open to show 350 million years. When engineers want to put a highway through a mountain, they usually tunnel. In western Maryland, they did something stranger. They cut the mountain in half. To carry Interstate 68 through Sidling Hill, crews removed about 10 million tons of rock between 1983 and 1985, leaving a notch 340 feet deep straight through the ridge. What they exposed stopped geologists cold. The walls reveal a near-perfect syncline, a massive U-shaped fold where stone laid down around 340 million years ago was bent like soft clay by the collision that built the Appalachian. You can read it like the pages of a book turned on their side. There's a pedestrian bridge over the highway just so people can stand and stare. It's one of the finest exposed rock formations on the East Coast, and most of the cars speeding through never slow down to look up. 27. The haunting that scared a future president. You picture a haunting, and you imagine a Victorian mansion at the end of a long drive. The most famous haunting in American history happened on a working farm in Adams, Tennessee, to a family named Bell, beginning in 1817. John and his children reported a presence that grew steadily more violent, scratching the walls, pulling hair, slapping the children, and finally speaking aloud in a voice the whole household could hear. They named it Kate. The story spread across the frontier. According to legend, it drew the curiosity of Andrew Jackson himself, years before the presidency, who supposedly fled, saying he'd rather fight the entire British Army than spend another night there. On December 20th, 1820, John Bell was found dead, a strange vial beside him. The family blamed the entity. It remains the only case in US history where a death was popularly blamed on a spirit, though every haunted detail traces back to a single book published in 1894. Quick one. If a fact surprised you so far, drop it in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the next. 26. The animals that came back from extinction here 1,000 years ago. Elk moved through these mountains in the tens of thousands. Then, European settlers arrived, and by the early 1800s, relentless hunting wiped them out. The eastern elk was officially declared extinct in 1880, the last one shot in Pennsylvania. The bugling call that once echoed off the ridges fell silent for over a century. But the story doesn't end there. On February 2nd, 2001, the Park Service released 25 elk, trucked in from Kentucky's Land Between the Lakes, into the remote Cataloochee Valley of Great Smoky Mountains National Park in North Carolina. More followed from Alberta, Canada. They aren't the original subspecies, that one's gone for good. But they took hold, spread, and today, wild elk graze the same valleys their kind was exterminated from, drawing crowds every autumn to hear the bulls bugle again across 2 centuries of silence. 25. The line where the rain decides its ocean. Somewhere along the crest of these mountains, there's an invisible line you can stand directly on top of, and a single raindrop's fate comes down to which side of your boot it lands on. It's called the Eastern Continental Divide, and it follows the spine of the Appalachians for hundreds of miles. Rain falling on the eastern slope drains toward the Atlantic Ocean. Rain falling feet away on the western slope flows the opposite direction, into the Ohio and Mississippi systems, and down to the Gulf of Mexico. In Virginia, the divide separates the James and Roanoke rivers heading east from the New River heading west. 2 drops in the same storm can end their journeys in seas 1,000 miles apart. In places, it's a knife-edge ridge. In others, just a quiet rise in the woods. Hikers on the Appalachian Trail cross between 2 oceans, over and over, without a marker in sight. And the divide quietly shapes which way every storm in these mountains runs. 24. The mountains that gave America NASCAR. NASCAR fills stadiums and signs billion-dollar TV deals. It was born from breaking the law in the Appalachian foothills. Through the 1930s and 40s, families in the dry counties of western North Carolina, Wilkes County especially, made moonshine and modified ordinary-looking cars to outrun federal agents on twisting mountain roads. The most famous of them was a Wilkes County boy named Junior Johnson, who made his first whiskey run at 13. He was never once caught running it. On Sundays, with no liquor to haul, the drivers started racing each other to settle who was fastest. The sport was formally organized on February 21, 1948, in Daytona Beach by Bill France Sr. Junior went on to win 50 races as a driver, accidentally invented the racing technique called drafting at the 1960 Daytona 500, and in 1986, received a pardon from President Ronald Reagan for an old still conviction. Mountain outlaws, in a literal straight line, became the world's best drivers. 23. The frozen rivers of stone. High on some of the oldest Appalachian summits, you'll find something that looks deeply wrong. Vast fields of jumbled, angular boulders pouring down the slopes like a river that froze solid. No glacier put them there. The ice sheets of the last ice age never actually reached the southern Appalachians. They stopped up in Pennsylvania. Instead, around 20,000 years ago, the land just south of the ice lived in a brutal periglacial climate. Water seeped into cracks in the bedrock, froze, expanded, and shattered the rock apart, over and over, for thousands of years. The result is called Felsenmeer, German for Sea of Rock, and you can walk across it today in Grayson County, Virginia, on Mount Rogers and White Top, the 2 highest peaks in the state. These stone fields are essentially fossils of a frozen world, sitting motionless in forests that are now green and temperate. The cold that made them is long gone. The wreckage it left behind never moved again. 22. The monster the county adopted. When witnesses claim they saw a monster, almost always you get one person, no corroboration, no record. On the night of September 12, 1952, in Flatwoods, Braxton County, West Virginia, you got the opposite. A group of boys saw something streak across the sky and come down on a nearby hill. They climbed up with 2 adults, a local mother named Kathleen May and a young National Guardsman, Eugene Lemon, to investigate. What they described that night has never been forgotten. A towering figure, 10 to 15 feet tall, with a glowing red face, clawed hands, and a body that seemed to hang in a pleated dark shroud, hissing in a foul-smelling mist. Several of them were physically sick afterward. Skeptics later argued the monster was a startled barn owl, lit by panic, and a meteor that was genuinely tracked over the region that night. Braxton County did something unusual. Instead of burying the story, it embraced it. The Flatwoods monster is now the county mascot, painted on water towers and celebrated at its own museum and festival. 21. The Peace of Canada stranded in West Virginia. Drive deep into the Monongahela National Forest in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, and you'll find a landscape that has no business being there. The cranberry glades are 4 boggy openings, sphagnum moss, cold black water, and stunted vegetation that belong 1,500 miles to the north, in the subarctic bogs of Canada. They were left behind as the climate warmed after the last ice age, a frozen-in-time pocket of the boreal world surviving at 3,400 feet on a high, cool plateau where frost has been recorded in every single month, including July. And the plants here have adapted to the starved soil in an unsettling way. They eat meat. Carnivorous sundews trap insects on sticky tentacles, and northern pitcher plants drown them in pools of digestive fluid. A quarter-mile boardwalk lets you walk out over the bog without sinking in. It's one of the only places in the South where you can stand inside a living relic of the Ice Age and watch the plants hunt. 20. The bridge people throw themselves off of, legally. For decades, crossing the new River Gorge in West Virginia took drivers 40 minutes of white-knuckle mountain switchbacks. So in 1977, engineers spanned it with a single sweeping steel arch. And when it opened, the new River Gorge Bridge was the longest steel arch bridge in the world, a record it held for 26 years until China surpassed it in 2003. It's still the longest steel arch in the Western Hemisphere. The deck sits 876 feet above the river, high enough to stack the Statue of Liberty beneath it nearly 4 times over, and the crossing now takes less than a minute. But the bridge is most famous for one day a year. Every October, on a day called Bridge Day, the road is closed, and hundreds of base jumpers legally hurl themselves off the railing into the gorge with parachutes, while up to 100,000 people watch from above. In 2020, the gorge became America's newest national park. 19. The people whose origins nobody could explain. Long before DNA testing, the mountains of East Tennessee and southwestern Virginia held a community that confounded everyone who tried to classify it. They were called the Melungeons. Dark-complexioned families clustered around Newman's Ridge in Hancock County, Tennessee, who didn't fit the rigid racial boxes of frontier America. The name first appears in an 1813 court record. For 2 centuries, the speculation ran wild. Portuguese sailors, shipwrecked Turks, a lost colony, Welsh Prince Madoc's descendants, and the mystery was often weaponized against them, pushing Melungeons onto the hardest, highest land. Then in 2012, a peer-reviewed genetic study led by researcher Roberta Estes cut through it. The DNA pointed to something quieter and very American. The Melungeons descended largely from unions between free sub-Saharan African men and Northern European women in colonial Virginia, who migrated together into the mountains to escape laws that would have enslaved their children. The exotic legends collapsed. The truth was more human. 18. The forest that's dying at the top of the mountain. On the highest peaks of the southern Appalachians, you climb up out of the leafy hardwoods and into something that feels like Canada. A dark, fragrant forest of red spruce and Fraser fir. A cold climate ecosystem stranded on the summits since the Ice Age. The Fraser fir grows wild nowhere else on Earth, but this Sky Island forest is in trouble. On Mount Mitchell in Yancey County, North Carolina, at 6,684 feet, the highest point anywhere east of the Mississippi, the firs have been dying for decades. A tiny invasive insect called the balsam woolly adelgid, no bigger than a sesame seed and accidentally imported from Europe, has been quietly killing the trees, while acid rain weakened the soil beneath them. On Grandfather Mountain and several other peaks, mortality is over 90%. The result is eerie. whole stands of bone-white dead trunks standing on the ridgelines like a ghost forest, undone in a few decades after surviving 100,000 years. 17. America's first luxury vacation. Before Americans flocked to the beaches, the wealthy went to the mountains to drink the water. Scattered through the Virginias is a belt of natural mineral springs, where water bubbles up warm and faintly sulfurous from underground. And in the 1700s and 1800s, these places became the country's very first resort destination. White Sulphur Springs in West Virginia and Warm Springs and Hot Springs in Bath County, Virginia, drew the Southern elite, who believed bathing in and drinking the mineral water cured rheumatism, exhaustion, and almost anything else. The homestead at Hot Springs traces its origins to 1766 and still claims to be the longest continuously operating resort in the country. Thomas Jefferson came to Warm Springs in 1818, and over the next century, almost every president from Martin Van Buren to Woodrow Wilson visited White Sulphur Springs. This was the original American vacation, long before Florida, the Hamptons, or the seaside even existed as a getaway. And as you saw right at the start of this video, one of those very resorts was hiding a Cold War secret bigger than the spa itself. 16. The mountain range on 3 continents. You probably think of the Appalachians as an American thing. Our mountains, running up the eastern side of the country, start to finish. But they don't actually start or finish here. Around 300 million years ago, when every continent was fused into the supercontinent Pangaea, the Appalachians were one stretch of a colossal chain geologists call the Central Pangaean Mountains, running through the heart of it. When Pangaea tore apart, that chain tore with it. The fragments drifted off on separate continents and became the Scottish Highlands and the Atlas Mountains of Morocco. Same rock, same origin. Matching folded strata you can still see in road cuts on both sides of the Atlantic. So when you stand on a ridge in Tennessee, you're on the geological twin of the mountains above the Sahara. 3 continents, 1 range, pulled apart by 200 million years of drift. 15. The most important river you've never heard of. To look at it, the Clinch River is an ordinary muddy green Appalachian stream, rising in Tazewell County, Virginia, sliding southwest and crossing quietly into eastern Tennessee. There is nothing about it that signals what it actually is. The single most biologically important river in the United States. Together with its tributary the Powell, the Clinch historically held at least 56 species of freshwater mussels. Today, 49 remain, around 20 of them federally endangered. The densest concentration of imperiled freshwater species anywhere in the country. One tiny endangered catfish, the pygmy madtom, lives in only 2 rivers on the entire planet, and this is one of them. The Nature Conservancy ranks the Clinch among the highest priority freshwater conservation sites in North America. These 2 streams together hold more mussel species than exist in all of Europe. Most people who fish them or float them have no idea they're drifting over one of the rarest ecosystems on Earth. 14. The mountain that's mostly underground. Here's the part that genuinely got me. The Appalachians you can see, the ridges, the peaks, the gentle blue summits, are only the tip of the mountain. The real mass of it is buried beneath your feet, deep inside the Earth's crust. When Africa collided with North America during the Alleghanian orogeny over 300 million years ago, it didn't just push rock up into the sky. It drove an enormous root of thickened crust down into the mantle, like the keel of a ship descending far below the visible waterline. Seismic and gravity surveys, including a landmark 1983 study in the journal Geology, confirm that root is still down there. And it's the reason these mountains have survived so long. As the surface erodes, isostasy slowly floats the buried root upward to compensate. So the summit of Mount Mitchell is just the visible tip of a Himalayan scale skeleton still locked into the crust. What you see is the stump. The mountain itself goes miles deeper. 13. The money that only worked in one town. You'd assume an American wage, however small, is American money. In the Appalachian coal fields from the 1870s through the 1940s, that assumption fell apart at the gate of the mine. Coal companies in West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee built entire towns from scratch. The houses, the school, the church, the doctor, the store. And they owned all of it. Instead of paying miners in US currency, many companies paid in scrip, privately minted tokens stamped with the company's name that could only be spent at the company's store. The store set its own prices. Rent came out of your pay. So did your tools and the blasting powder you used to mine the coal. A miner could end a brutal month actually owing the company money. It was a closed economic loop captured in Merle Travis's 1946 song, 16 Tons. I Owe My Soul to the Company Store, which Tennessee Ernie Ford carried to the top of the charts in 1955. 12. The people who were here before the Cherokee. When Europeans arrived in the southern Appalachians, the Cherokee told them something strange. They said that when their own ancestors first came to these mountains, the land was already occupied by a pale-skinned people who could not see well in daylight and lived and moved at night. The Cherokee called them the Moon-Eyed People. The earliest written record of the story is by the naturalist Benjamin Smith Barton in 1797, and on top of Fort Mountain in Murray County, Georgia, sits something that keeps the question alive: an ancient stone wall running 855 feet across the summit, built by hands that long predate the Cherokee. Archaeologists date it to roughly 500 to 1500 years ago, and nobody knows for certain who stacked it or why. A carved soapstone effigy of the Moon-Eyed People now stands in a small museum in Murphy, North Carolina. The legend may be just a legend, but somebody built that wall, and we still can't say who. 11. The mountains that may have frozen the planet. We think of mountains as the result of Earth's forces, but the Appalachians may have once reached up and changed the entire planet's climate. Here's the chain of events scientists have pieced together. When the range was young and towering, around 450 million years ago, all that freshly exposed rock began to weather and break down. That chemical weathering pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and locks it away in stone. Carbon dioxide is the gas that traps heat. So as the vast young Appalachians slowly dissolved in the rain, they may have drawn down enough CO2 to cool the whole Earth, helping to tip the planet into the end Ordovician Ice Age and the mass extinction that came with it. A 2006 Ohio State study led by Matthew Saltzman first linked the events. It is still a working hypothesis, but the implication is that a mountain range in what's now the eastern United States may have reached up and helped freeze the world. We are 10 facts from the end. If anything we have covered so far landed wrong, or if there is something about the Appalachians we have not touched yet, drop it in the comments. The ones I have not heard of yet are usually the best ones. Alright, 10 to go. 10. The forest that glows in the dark. Walk deep into an old Appalachian forest on a moonless night. Look down at the rotting logs and damp leaf litter, and you may see something that doesn't seem real. A soft, greenish light glowing up out of the ground. It isn't a reflection, and it isn't your eyes playing tricks. It's called foxfire, bioluminescence produced by certain fungi, like the honey mushroom, Armillaria millia, that grow on decaying wood. The fungus runs glowing threads through the rotting timber, and the wood itself appears to breathe a faint, cold light. Mountain people have known about it for centuries. The famous Foxfire books, compiled by high school students at Rabun Gap Nacoochee School in Rabun County, Georgia, took their name from it. The glow is real enough that during the American Revolution, it was used to light the dials inside the Turtle, the world's first combat submarine, in 1775. Scientists still don't fully understand why these fungi evolved to glow at all. 9. The state line that was drawn in the wrong place. The border between North Carolina and Tennessee was supposed to be simple. Follow the crest of the mountains, letting the highest ridgeline divide the two states the way a watershed divides rain. In 1799, surveyors named McDowell, Matthews, and Vance set out along the spine of the Appalachians to mark it. But somewhere bordering Cherokee County, North Carolina, the team came off the ridge for reasons nobody has ever fully explained, possibly following an old Cherokee treaty line instead of the true watershed, and the boundary they drew straight off the mountain crest. A second survey by William Davenport in 1821 tried to clean it up, and the dispute eventually climbed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1914, in North Carolina versus Tennessee, before being settled. A state line drawn to follow nature's own boundary was, on the ground, a guess made by exhausted men on a mountainside, and it took the Supreme Court 115 years to fix it. 8. the mountains the Cherokee were marched out of, and the ones who hid. These mountains were the heart of the Cherokee Nation. Their capital, New Echota, sat near present-day Calhoun in northern Georgia, and their homeland covered the southern Appalachians across Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Then gold was found on Cherokee land in 1828, and everything changed. The Indian Removal Act passed in 1830, and in December 1835, an unauthorized faction of around 300 Cherokees signed the Treaty of New Echota, ceding the entire homeland for $5 million. The Senate ratified it by one vote. In May 1838, the U.S. Army began the forced roundup. Around 16,000 Cherokees were driven 800 miles west to Oklahoma. Missionary Dr. Eliezer Butler, who walked with them, estimated roughly 4,000 died of cold, hunger, and disease. But not all of them went. About 1,000 Cherokee, led by men remembered as Solly and others, hid deep in the North Carolina mountains. Their descendants are still there today, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians on the Qualla boundary, in the homeland they never surrendered. 7. The salt marsh where humans may rewrite their own history. School textbooks once taught that the first Americans, the Clovis people, arrived around 13,000 years ago. In the Saltville Valley of Smith County, Virginia, there's a marsh that might rewrite that. Sitting on top of an ancient salt deposit, it drew animals for tens of thousands of years, and the mud preserved an Ice Age graveyard. Mastodons, woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, and musk oxen pulled from the ground here. The first written record of these bones of uncommon size was a letter sent to Thomas Jefferson in 1782. The bigger find came 2 centuries later. Beginning in the 1980s, work by Dr. Jerry McDonald of the Virginia Museum of Natural History uncovered mastodon bones with possible cut marks and tool-like fragments radiocarbon dated to around 14,500 years ago. If that interpretation holds, humans were here roughly 1,500 years before Clovis, about the same time gap that separates the Norman conquest from today. The claim is still debated, but the stakes are huge, a quiet Virginia marsh that might move the date of the first Americans. 6. The single doorway to the entire West. For early settlers pressing inland, the Appalachians weren't scenery, they were a wall. An almost unbroken barrier of steep ridges running hundreds of miles with very few ways through. And the most important gap in that whole wall was a single notch at the tri-point where Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee meet, the Cumberland Gap. Bison and native peoples used it as a trail for generations. A Virginia physician named Dr. Thomas Walker mapped it for settlers in 1750. Then, in March 1775, the frontiersman Daniel Boone and a crew of about 30 axemen hired by the Transylvania Company widened the trail into the Wilderness Road, opening the gap as a gateway to Kentucky. What followed was one of the great migrations in American history. Between 1780 and 1810, an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 settlers funneled through one mountain pass to reach the West. Among them were the parents and grandparents of Abraham Lincoln. Geography decided where America grew. It grew through that door. 5. The national park people vanish into. You'd assume the most visited national park in the United States is the safest. Over 12 million people pass through it every year. Great Smoky Mountains National Park is also a place where, sometimes, people walk in and are never seen again. The most haunting case is that of Dennis Lloyd Martin. On June 14, 1969, the 6-year-old was playing with other children in a meadow at Spence Field, deep in the park, during a family Father's Day outing. He crouched behind some bushes to playfully surprise the adults, and in those few seconds, around 4:30 in the afternoon, he disappeared. 2.5 inches of rain that night washed away every track. What followed was the largest search operation in the park's history at the time. Thousands of volunteers, the FBI, Green Berets, and helicopters combing the ridges for weeks. They found nothing. No trace of Dennis Martin was ever recovered. The Smokies are over 800 square miles of fog and dense laurel thicket. And over the decades, his is one of several disappearances the mountains have never given back. 4. The most alive place in the temperate world. Step back and ask why this video even exists. Why one mountain range hides this much? The answer is in the ground itself. The southern Appalachians are the most biodiverse temperate region on the planet. When the Ice Age glaciers bulldozed life off the rest of the continent, they never reached these mountains. So the Appalachians became a refuge, an ark where species survived, sheltered, and quietly kept evolving across millions of years of stability. The result holds world records. Great Smoky Mountains National Park alone has documented over 19,000 species, with scientists estimating the true number, counting everything unseen, may exceed 80,000. More than 30 species of salamander live in the park, making these mountains the global capital of them. The rivers shelter the richest freshwater mussel and fish diversity in North America. UNESCO inscribed the Smokies as a World Heritage Site in 1983 for this very reason. Every strange fact in this list, the relic bogs, the glowing fungi, the synchronized fireflies, grows out of one truth. Nothing here was ever wiped clean. Life simply kept going. 3. The feud that nearly started a war between two states. It's become almost a punchline. The Hatfields and the McCoys. The cartoon of two hillbilly clans shooting at each other. The real story is darker and far more serious. The Hatfields lived on the West Virginia side of the Tug Fork River, led by William Anderson, Devil Anse Hatfield. The McCoys lived across it in Kentucky, led by Randolph, Ole Rannell McCoy. The feud began in 1865 with the murder of a Union soldier, Asa Harmon McCoy, and escalated through a stolen pig, a doomed romance between Rosanna McCoy and John C. Hatfield, and the 1882 killing of Ellison Hatfield, stabbed 26 times. On New Year's night 1888, Hatfields burned Randolph McCoy's cabin and killed 2 of his children. Kentucky sent agents across state lines into West Virginia to seize 8 Hatfields by force. West Virginia protested the illegal arrests, and the dispute climbed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1888. About a dozen people died in the feud, and one Hatfield, a man known as Cotton Top Mounts, was eventually hanged for it. 2. The river that's older than the mountains it cuts through. Rivers are supposed to obey mountains, to wind around them, to flow down and away from the high ground. The New River does the opposite. It begins in the Blue Ridge foothills near Blowing Rock, North Carolina, and flows north, up through Virginia and into West Virginia. And rather than going around the Appalachian ridges, it slices directly through them. The explanation is almost impossible to picture. The New River is older than the mountains it crosses. It was already there, running its course across the land, before this section of the Appalachians had finished rising over 300 million years ago. As the rock slowly bulged upward beneath it, the river simply kept sawing down at the same pace, cutting its channel straight through the rising mountain like a wire through clay. Geologists call this an antecedent river, and the result is a series of dramatic water gaps, most strikingly at the Narrows in Giles County, Virginia. By some estimates, the New is over 300 million years old, which would make it among the oldest rivers on Earth. The mountains literally grew up around it, and it never once moved aside to let them. 1. The oldest mountains on Earth, quietly disappearing. We end where we began, with deep time. The rocks beneath the Appalachians are part of a basement complex about 1.2 billion years old, and the mountains themselves were raised across a series of vast continental collisions. The Taconic, the Acadian, the Alleghanian, that finished roughly 300 million years ago. That makes them among the oldest mountain ranges on the planet. Older than the Rockies, older than the Alps, older than the Himalayas, older than bone, older than trees, older than almost anything you could name. And at their peak, hundreds of millions of years ago, they were giants. Geologists estimate the young Appalachians stood as tall as the Himalayas do today, a wall of jagged rock scraping the upper sky, where now there are only soft green ridges worn smooth. Here's the thing about the oldest mountains on Earth. They are still dying. Cosmogenic dating of bedrock at Dolly Sods in West Virginia and across the range shows them eroding at about 10 to 30 meters every million years, orders of magnitude slower than the young Himalayas. No human will ever live long enough to watch the change, but they are, without question, vanishing. The mountains the Cherokee walked, the mountains that hid Mothman and the Moonshiners and the Moon-Eyed Wall, the mountains older than life on land, are quietly, patiently wearing down to nothing. They were here long before us. They will outlast us by an unimaginable stretch, wearing down so slowly that almost nobody, driving past those soft blue ridges, realizes they're watching the slowest disappearance on Earth. If you made it this far, you're someone who actually wants to know what these mountains hide. Tell me in the comments which fact you'd never heard before, and which range you grew up under. Subscribe if you want more of these. The next one is already coming.